The House of Mystery presents Inside Writing, the radio show where authors discuss their writing process in all genres.
Welcome back into the House of Mystery, and we're at the interview part of the show. We are covering true crime today, the book Checkmate, The Wallace Murder Mystery, and it's written by Mark Russell, who's on the line. Thank you for being here, Mark.
You're welcome, Al. Great to be here.
Well, Mark, this is quite the story. Now, I've heard a little bit about this before. How did you get into this story? Like, what led you down to this story? Because I believe it took place in, 1931. So what got you there?
Yeah, it did. When I was about 9 years of age, I live in Liverpool where the crime took place. I remember an advert coming on television, one night for about a drama documentary that was going to come on, and it was called Who Killed Julia Wallace? And I was, mesmerised by the screen, Mm-hmm. It looked like someone brandishing a poker back and forth and a woman lying on the floor dead. And my mother came in the room, and I said, have you seen this? And she notified me that she said, it happened just up the road, not far away, in 1931. Well, I was just amazed, intrigued completely. And at the time, in 1931, my mother's family lived in the area of Anfield where it happened. So it had a bit of a personal connection as well, So that, that ignited my interest in the case. And, we watched it when the programme was aired a couple of nights later. We watched it, and me parents, my mother said, we'll go up there to Wolverton Street, where the crime happened. We'll go up to have a look at the house tomorrow. So we went up there, and it was quite eerie looking, looking at the house, and the street was in darkness. And, but that moment had a lasting effect on me, and, really give me the interest in the case.
So how do you go about investigating a case that was in 1931? It must be pretty hard to find people that were alive at the time and knew about the crime or were part of the family, right? Or
right, yeah, it was. What I done was I wrote to the local Echo newspaper, asking if anyone had any connection to the case or who had family connected to the case. And I wasn't met with a very good, response. But one person did contact me, and it was a man named Harry Williams, and he told me that his father was the first policeman on the scene, at the crime, at the murder, on the night in question in 1931, and I got contact with him. But what I did do is, go, through all the newspapers at the record office, from the time, the contemporary newspapers. I viewed the Merseyside police records, from the crime. They were available. And also, and eventually went down to the National Archives in Kew to view the records that they had there, the Department of Public Prosecutions files, and there was a substantial amount, altogether. So I was able to build a book around what it accessed.
Yeah, that's when you said you didn't get necessarily a good, warm response. Why do you think that is?
I think it could be, a lot of. I'm not sure. It could be something like people didn't see the letter in the paper, or a lot of the people who were involved with the case had passed away, and died, and their families might not have been interested in pursuing the case, anything to do with it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so what's the basic layout of the crime? Maybe set the scene for the listeners.
Yes, of course. Well, on the 19th of January, Wallace was a 52-year-old. William Wallace was he was an insurance man, and he used to go around collecting insurance. He was called he's a man from the Prudential, and he's take people's, these, give them money, every whatever, and he'd collect on his rounds. Well, on the 19th, he visited the chess club in Liverpool. It was the Central Chess Club in the city centre. He used to attend. His hobby in life was chess. He loved chess, and he used to go to the chess club every so often. And this night he went to the chess club. He found out there had been a telephone message left for him from a caller, and he arrived 20 minutes after we established that the call was made. And the chess club captain, Mr. Beattie, approached Wallace and said, I had a call earlier, Mr. Wallace, for you to call as an address tomorrow night, the 20th. And he said, who from? And he said, the names are Qualtrough. Now, it's an unusual name, but in Liverpool, it's, you know, the Isle of Man, close to Liverpool. It's of Manx origin. Qualtrough. It's pronounced Qualtrough. And he said, I don't know anyone by the name of Qualtrough. Where's the address? And he said, 25 Menlove Gardens East, in an area of Liverpool in the south of the city. It ends up about 4 miles away from Wallace's address. And he said, I don't know anyone by that name. What did he say? He said, oh, they want you to call with regards to your business. He want to take an endowment policy out on his daughter, this caller. So Wallace didn't think anything else. He said, oh, well, I'll go tomorrow. I'll check it out. And well, anyway, he plays his chess that night, and on the way home, he's walking home with a friend and neighbour, and he asks him which way to go, and another neighbour, the neighbour says, take a certain route, but Wallace said, I'll go another way that I've got an idea of. Well, anyway, on the 20th, he's collecting that day, and he comes home in the night, early evening, and Wallace said he left the house at 7:15, and he went to Menlove Gardens area in the south of the city. He takes 3 trams to get there. And when he goes to Menlove Gardens, he finds out that there's a north, west and a south, but there's no east. So he asks around the area, you know, in different shops. He even asked the policeman. And after about 3/4 of an hour in the area, he takes a streetcar back home. And about 8:45, he reaches his home, and he goes in the house and finds his wife, Julia, bludgeoned to death on the floor, you know, in the front parlour, the front room, the living room.
Wow. Oh. So, wow. So what do you think? So I guess the police started thinking it was him. You know, he's the closest. But isn't that kind of an alibi, all of the things he was doing?
Yes, that's a good point. I mean, that was one of the reasons also why the police think it was him who done it, because he was going out of his way to establish where he was, you know, in an area that he said he didn't know. But in actual fact, he did know the area of, you know, Menlove Gardens. I'm not saying he knew Menlove Gardens, but he knew that area because the superintendent, his boss, his superintendent at the prudential offices, his house was about 300 yards from the Menlove Gardens area, but his boss did not know whether there was a Menlove Gardens East or not. You see, what the police believe is that Wallace, he made the phone call himself the night before, deliberately, you know, to, like as a subterfuge to give him an excuse to, you know, the following night. And when he went up to Menlove Gardens, he could ask around, you know, because there's no such address. Whereas if he knocked on an address that existed, it'd just get him there, and he'd find out that there was no one there by that name. Whereas police think the police thought that, oh, he's given a non-existent address, so he can ask several people to establish where he was up there.
So, okay, so now you said she was bludgeoned, so do we know what happened to her? Like, what was she bludgeoned with, or was it a struggle, and do we know the death time or any of that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a good point, Al. When Wallace got home, he said he couldn't get in through the front door because it was the usual practice, you see. In England, we have terraced houses, so you can go out the back way of the day, but of a night you come in through the front. It's the way it worked. When he got home, he got into the house at about 9:15, and he asked his neighbours next door, because they were coming out the house next door. He asked if they would wait because he couldn't get in and that. So he goes in the house and he's looking around, and then he comes back out to the neighbours and says, come in, she's been killed. So they go into the front room. Now, the police come at about 9:10, then the main police detectives, the superintendents and detectives, the main ones, the Liverpool CID, they appear about 10 to 10, and the pathologist appears about sometime just around that. And the pathologist, Dr. McFall, on his first report of the death, he said that the victim had been struck 3 or 4 times with terrific force with something like with a large-headed weapon. I don't know, like a club or something. But in his reports the day after that, he changed his, evidence saying she'd been struck with one violent, terrific blow to the left of the head, and the other 10 blows, so 11 in all, less ferocious, but to the back of the head, crushing the skull in. Now, the scenario in the front living room, where it happened, was there was a Macintosh close to her, and it had burn marks on it, ashes, and her dress also, her skirt also had burn marks on it from the rings. What they said was that she'd been leaning over the gas fire, and she'd been struck unawares. She wasn't, so in other words, that she was comfortable with whoever was in the room with her. And, but Dr. McFall said that, she'd have been killed instantly with the first blow, and would have been, the other 10 blows would have administered. She'd have been dead within 30 seconds, definitely.
So what's unusual? So what do you know about their marriage? Were they getting along? Had they been fighting? Was there issues? Or was there, what would be the motive of him killing her?
It's a good point. I mean, the neighbours and everyone who knew them said they seemed a devoted couple, and they seemed all in all to each other. The neighbours next door, the neighbours they met in the backyard, Wallace met, the Johnstons, said they'd never heard any noise, or any arguments between them. But the point is, Wallace was 52 at the time, and he said my wife, who I believe to be 52 as well, or 53. But it only came out 20 years ago in 2001 that she was actually 17 years older than Wallace. Now, that was not known at the time by the police. They never investigated Julia's background or anything. Now, whether people say, that's she was a pensioner at the time, and he was like, he'd got tired of her, and, but no, at the trial, the defence, the prosecution said they could not find a motive, like, they couldn't, they couldn't deny that they seemed all in all to each other, the Wallaces, and, they were happily married.
Did he have an insurance policy on her?
Well, she was insured for £20, which I suppose by today's amount of money, I'm not sure what that'd be in today's. And she had a bank account of £90, but Wallace himself had an account for £152 himself. But it's a good point, because people say, he wouldn't have murdered her for such a low, insurance policy. But the same people say that he went up to, when he went up to the Menlove Gardens area to gain a commission from the possible business with this Qualtro, he was doggedly going after it. So I say that, people who say he wouldn't kill her for £20, which I'm not saying he would, but they seem to forget that they're quick enough saying that he would doggedly gain a commission of the equivalent of £20 as well. But as I say, the prosecution at the trial said they couldn't suggest a possible motive, but I think that different people say, like you're saying at the start, when a spouse is murdered, they immediately look at the spouse, won't they?
Yeah, usually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So there was no real motive, or nothing that sticks out particularly. It could have been maybe the money, or not that it's a lot. So how did they prosecute him? Like, what evidence did they have against him?
Well, the police investigations went on for about 13 days, and they were trying to get enough evidence, but most of the evidence they got was circumstantial. They couldn't. Also, that within a couple of days, the police put a call out, to the post offices to find out if the phone call could be traced. Now, in 1931, it was quite a difficult thing to do, but ironically, Al, the police managed to trace the call because the caller had acted in an erratic manner in the phone box, because the call took 3 operators to get the call through to the chess club, and when they found out that the call had been traced, it emanated in a call box 400 yards from Wallace's house. So the police immediately thought, oh, well, Wallace has come out of his house, made the phone call, and made his way to the chess club.
Yeah, I kind of think that too. I mean, that's pretty weird. That, wow. So they ended up convicting him. Then, how long did that take?
He went to the committal proceedings, you know, a magistrate's court, we call it in Britain, where, you know, to see if there was a case to answer for. And he found out that, you know, he did that. There was a case to answer for, and he was sent to the Spring Assizes, you know, the main trial at Liverpool Crown Court in 1931 in April. And he was a 4-day trial. You know, trials last a lot longer now, but in them days, like, it was a 4-day trial. And the jury found him guilty. But the ironic thing was, a lot of people, the judge, Mr. Wright, from what I've read of the transcripts and what the general belief is, that the judge believed that it hadn't been proved with, you know, it hadn't been proved totally that Wallace had done it, and he was sort of like directing the jury to, you know, a not guilty verdict. But the ironic thing was, the jury found him guilty, and then within 10 days, his solicitors put Wallace's appeal in, you know, to be heard. Now, it didn't look very good, because there'd only ever been 2 times where appeals have been overturned in British law, and there was never one with the same, like, background of the Wallace case. So what happened was, he was took down to London to the law courts, and which is now the Royal Court of Justice, and over a 2-day hearing, his appeal was over 2 days, and the law courts, the three appeal judges, they found him, you know, the verdict. So, you know, it wasn't proved with, you know, in regards to the evidence, and he was like, the verdict was quashed, and he was, you know, he won his appeal over it, basically.
Oh, so he got free on it. Did they try to try him again or anything like that?
No, that was it then. He was, like, you know, free.
So how did it go for his life then after that big trial and after the appeal, and he got set free? Was he able to go on selling life insurance and living in the same place and all that, or did people not like him anymore? Well,
that's a good point, Al, because you see, at the time, I know my grandparents, you know, they used to pay him on his round, and my grandparents and my great aunt was obsessed with the case. She actually went to the trial, Wallace's trial, and she used to pay him, and she thought he was absolutely guilty. She said, I always knew there was something about him. And my grandfather was the opposite. My grandfather always said, although he was a bit aloof, you know, he seemed a bit conceited, man Wallace, but my grandfather believed that he believed in his innocence. But what happened was, he went back to his home in Wolverton Street, but his solicitor, Hector Munro, advised Wallace against it. He said it wouldn't really be a good idea to go back to the same area. And like you said, he was met with hostility on his rounds, you know, and people shouting, and all the children in the area, like, you know, referring to him as a murderer. Another thing was that people said, you know, when you mentioned about motive before, you know, the local gossips would say, oh, he's got another woman or that. But that never came about. It was never found out afterwards that he had a woman, another woman in the case. But he ended up going on the round, but he'd get poison pen letters sent to him and, you know, hate mail, and he'd hand them over to the solicitor, and his solicitor, Hector Munro, said, look, it wouldn't be a good idea to carry on living there. And in the end, Wallace moved out and moved across the Mersey in Liverpool to the Wirral Peninsula, which is, you know, I think, and what Wallace done was, the Prudential offices is in Liverpool, in the city centre, not far from the chess club, actually. And what he done was, he took him off his round and he gave him an office job, you know, to save any harassment or that. And so his bungalow was about 3/4 of a mile away by train and streetcar and that. And when he went to the chess club again, he was sort of like, you know, snubbed. What people were used to be as, you know, co-players in the club, he didn't really want to know him anymore. So he felt, you know, I think the general consensus was that I think they thought he was guilty. But he died 2 years after, you know, after he died, just a bit more than 2 years after Julia died. He was only 54 when he passed away.
What did he die of?
He had a recurrent kidney problem, when he was younger, one of his jobs was, before he became a prudential officer, he went to India and China. His brother was in the Far East, Joseph, his younger brother, and he advised Wallace to come over there, to work as a draper's assistant and different things. But Wallace had a recurrent kidney problem, He had it operated on several times, and when he eventually come back from China in 1907, he had his kidney removed, in Guy's Hospital. And he always had this problem with his kidney. And, on his death certificate, it states like uremia, which is like a urinary problem, and pyelonephritis due to, kidney problems and the left kidney removed. So he barely lived, 2 years after his wife.
Well, did they have any kids or anything like that, or not at all?
No. Didn't have any children, no.
How long were they together? Was this like a second marriage for them, or was this something they'd been together a long time?
They met in 1911, and they married in 1914. So they'd been together nearly 17 years. Neither of them had been married before,
Wow, it's quite strange. So I'm taking it that the jury found him guilty primarily because the phone call came from a phone box that was fairly close to his own place.
Right, yeah.
So that was really kind of the main piece of evidence that they had.
Yeah, I think so, well, yeah. And,
wow.
Sorry.
No, so that's crazy that they could find him guilty on that. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, it does sound kind of hokey, because if someone's looking for insurance, did they all have phones in their homes back then, or did everybody use a phone box?
No, the thing is, no one really had phones. I mean, Wallace didn't have a phone at home, and a lot of people didn't. And one of the prosecution, what stated to him was, well, have you ever had a message like this left here at the chess club before anyway? And he said, no, never. And when they asked him, you see, what he was trying to make out, and the defence tried to make out in Wallace's defence, was that someone had called at the house, on the night when Wallace had gone out, been shown, it was someone that Julia had known, and been shown to you see, in houses in Liverpool then, the front parlour was used mainly for admitting guests into, or in Wallace's case as well, Julia played the piano and Wallace played the violin, so it was like musical evenings as well they would have. But the belief was that someone knocked and Julia showed the killer into the front room. Obviously someone she knew because she felt relaxed with, and like you're saying, there was no struggle. She turned her back to light the fire up because it being a cold night, and that's when she was struck over the head. But on Wallace's first statement, when the police asked him, can you think of anyone who would have done this to your wife? His remark was, I have no suspicion of anyone. But in his second statement, he starts saying that there's a couple of men that used to work with him at the Prudential. Now, in Wallace's defence, people say, oh, well, hang on. If she's admitted someone to the house, who might she have you got a list of people who she might have admitted? Now, Wallace gave this list of different people, like friends of his, but he put these two workers in. One was called Richard Gordon Parry, and one was called Joseph Marsden. Now, Parry was 22 at the time, and he'd done some of Wallace's round for him when Wallace was ill about 2 or 3 years before. Now, being a young fella, he was a bit like, he was a bit brash, this young fella, and some of Wallace's collection money, he noticed that some of the accounts hadn't been cashed in. In other words, he'd been pocketing some of the money, Parry. But when the police investigated Parry and Marsden, they both had alibis for the night of the murder. So it was neither of them. But people now are still touting Parry as being a killer, but it wasn't him. And when you look at it, you can't look really further than Wallace. I mean, myself personally, he acted in a strange manner. He was a very precise person, Wallace, and he was very intricate in everything he done. People say the chess, being into chess and counter moves, he's deliberately done it, to make the perfect murder. I don't look at that. I think that for someone who was so, he was an intelligent man. He was into chemistry and everything. He gave lectures in chemistry, you know, in Liverpool for about 5 years in the 1920s. And, but I just think for those 2 nights, the night of the phone call and then the night of the visit to the Menlove Gardens area for the non-existence address, he acted rather in a ridiculous, you know, strange manner. That was you know, the address, people said to him the day after, you work for the Prudential and insurance firm, haven't you got a directory of Liverpool with a map in? And, you know, you never consulted a map. And he said, I didn't think of it, which to me is totally against his character. Because everything he'd done was usually by the book, you know.
Oh, I wonder, so did they check to see if she had been sexually assaulted, or did they do that back in 31?
No, they did. I mean, Professor McFall, he said when he'd done the post-mortem, you know, the day after on the Wednesday, he said when he was removing the clothes from the victim, she was wearing like a diaper. She was incontinent.
Oh.
You know, yeah.
Jeez, before the Depends.
Yeah.
Well, then, but okay, so when he came home and found her and then reported it to the neighbors and the police, when the police come, did they check to see if he was covered in blood or blood spatter or anything like that, or? Yeah,
good point. I mean, one thing with it all is that was one of the things my granddad believed in his innocence for, and even myself, I can't, you know, describe how someone, if it was Wallace, he managed to kill her and not have it. Yeah, when he was taken to Liverpool, the Anfield police station, he was examined by Detective Gold, and he said there was, you know, he checked his hands, his face, his legs, his boots and everything, and there wasn't any blood on Wallace. There was none on him. But the funny thing is, in their search of the house, the police as well, they hired 2 powerful lamps from the Liverpool Fire Brigade, you know, so they could check everywhere, very intricately, all over the house. And there was no, with the exception of the blood in the parlour where the victim was, there was no blood in the house anywhere except in the lavatory upstairs, a small spot on the toilet pan. But they're not sure whether that was from the same time anyway. But there was no blood on him, no. Wallace, no.
Wow, sure, a strange case.
Yeah.
And so nobody else was ever arrested, and it just sort of, the case just kind of stayed cold then.
Yeah, yes. I know Wallace, you know, when he got his acquittal quashed and when he was like going back to his office job and that, he was libelled by a few newspapers, so he sued them. He was advised to sue. But he'd done an article, a five-part article for a magazine that was called John Bull in Britain in the 1930s. And he you know, people could say, well, he never exactly written it. He gave his life story, and it was ghost written, you know, to make it more interesting. But Wallace continued to believe that it was someone else, and in other words, it was Richard Gordon Parry. And he continued to believe that it was Parry who murdered his wife. But now this, to me, seems that I personally think it was Wallace who done it. You know, and he's trying to fit someone else up with, like, a patsy, basically.
Hmm. Well, and why did he say Parry would do it? Like, what was his thinking behind that? Like, what was going on?
I don't know. I think he's probably been the nearest possible suspect that he could think of. Maybe because he said that Parry had been stealing money in the past. That's another thing, Al. When he came home, Wallace, he said that that was another thing he said, the police investigation said, well, why would your house be burgled? He said, they burgled, what he had a cash box in the back room, the room that he lived in. It was like a kitchen area with a range. And when he took this cash box down, he said there had been about £4 missing. Now, that was the money he collected on his round over the last couple of days. He'd had influenza on the Saturday, so it was a low amount of money, you know. But the police, another thing that the police thought is suspect, that Wallace was trying to make out that whoever killed his wife had then took the money down off the cash box, off a shelf that's 7 foot too high, took the money out and then put the cash box back. And Detective Superintendent Moore said a thief wouldn't do it. I can't see a thief why he would replace a cash box. But I think the idea that whoever killed Julia was like, trying to steal the money out of the house as well.
Sure, a weird case. And so, what's your feeling on it then? At the end of the day, if someone said to you, "Who did he kill his wife or not?" How do you answer?
I'd have to say yes. Now, when people say, "Well, what would he do it for?" I don't know. I mean, Wallace was one of those sorts of people. He seemed to be like a narcissist, and I think he thought he was a bit more intelligent than the average ordinary person. And people might say, "Oh, that's far-fetched. I don't believe that." But I honestly think he was trying to commit the perfect crime. People do kill without motives, don't they? Look at Leopold and Loeb.
Yeah.
And they kidnapped that boy, didn't they, and murdered him just to see if he could get away with it.
Oh yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff that goes on. You just never know, right? But it's just strange because there's usually something. He must have really disliked her then. Yes.
I mean, like you're asking before, people couldn't think. I mean, even like I say, the prosecution said, we cannot find an exact motive, but people do kill for the most unusual reasons, don't they? And, a friend of mine a few years ago, when we were at a bit of a talk, someone was giving a talk on the Wallace case. She said to me, "I wonder what Wallace would think now." And I said, "And there lies your answer. I don't know, maybe he wanted some infamy,
Yeah, who knows? It's hard to say. Doesn't sound, at this point. That's quite an interesting case. Wow. So now, where do people find your book now? Your book is available where?
The publisher called Mango publishes but it's eventually, I think it's going to eventually be on Amazon, and Book Depository and places like that.
Right. Well, we're going to have the book up on our website as well, so people can do one click and pick up the book when they're listening or after they listen, so they don't have to search for it. We'll have that all up there. And so what's next for Mark Russell? Are you going to do some more books like this or follow true crime? Or?
Well, this one took me about 10 years, Al. So, the amount of research I put into it. Oh, it's totally enjoyable, but there was times I felt like, forgetting it.
Yeah.
Possibly, yeah. Probably another case, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, there's nothing but time.
No.
Nothing but time, especially with COVID, right? You can spend lots of time doing it.
Right.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Well, it's been an interesting conversation. Our guest has been Mark Russell, and the book we're talking about is Checkmate. It's the Wallace murder mystery. Thank you for being on the show.
You're welcome, Mal. It was great to speak to you. And
We interrupt our programming. This is a national emergency. Important details will follow.
Are you prepared? Legacy Food Storage. The best way to protect your family is by being prepared. Go now to legacyfoodstorage.com. Use coupon code HOM15 now for 15% off. Quick, go!
To find out more about our show, guests, or to listen to past shows from our archive, please go to www.houseofmysteryradio.com.
Show's over for now.
Was it as good for you as it was for me?
Well, good night.
This has been a production of Something Weird Media.
I'll be back.